Imagine yourself standing in the warm dawn light, the air thick with possibility. The earth is cool beneath your feet, damp with dew, and the first birds are only just beginning their songs. Somewhere in the distance, the faint rhythm of water can be heard, tumbling over rocks, a steady heartbeat in the quiet morning. You are high in the mountains of ancient China, a place where clouds drift lazily below jagged peaks, and where the line between the natural and the supernatural is softer than you might expect. In this world, people believed that rivers could be home to dragons, that mountains might cradle gods, and that even a stone might conceal a hidden spark of life. What if a life, bright and wild, could spring from stone? On the mountain of flowers and fruit, a place said to be lush beyond compare, stood a rock unlike any other. It was vast and smooth, polished not by human hands but by the slow caress of time and rain. Locals whispered that the stone had absorbed the essence of heaven and earth, nourished by moonlight and sunlight, kissed by the winds and the storms. In their stories, it was no ordinary object. It was alive in some mysterious way, a vessel waiting to be filled. Centuries of faith and imagination had already transformed it into something extraordinary before the true wonder even began. One morning, under a sky painted with the soft pink of dawn, that stone cracked open. From within, a figure emerged, not a human, nor a beast exactly, but something in between. A monkey, though no ordinary monkey, leapt forth into the world. His eyes glowed like twin beams of golden light, so fierce and brilliant that they startled even the Jade Emperor in his distant heavenly palace. This was Sun Wukong, though no one knew his name yet. He was born not of flesh and blood, but of stone, carrying with him the essence of Earth's solidity and the heavens' boundless energy. Imagine for a moment being there. Perhaps you are one of the wild monkeys who had already made the mountain your home. You see the strange newcomer tumble forth from the stone, shaking the dust from his fur, blinking at the brightness of the sun. He is small, yet there is something in the tilt of his head, the confidence of his movements, that makes you pause. You sense destiny in him, though you cannot explain why. From the very first day, this stone-born monkey displayed a boundless curiosity. He was quick, darting from tree to tree, his eyes wide at the sight of cascading waterfalls, his ears pricked to the rustling of bamboo groves. He touched everything: smooth rocks, fragrant blossoms, the cool surface of a stream. He seemed to want to understand the world not with words, but with movement, taste, and play. If you've ever watched a child discover something new, you'll understand. The joy was in the discovery itself, not in any reward. The other monkeys, who had lived ordinary lives of foraging and climbing, were drawn to him. At first, perhaps they laughed at his clumsy leaps or his daring attempts to balance on swaying branches. Yet his courage and laughter were infectious. He never seemed to fear the unknown. If there was a cave to be explored, he was the first to enter. If there was a mountain stream rushing too quickly to cross, he would plunge into it just to see what lay on the other side. Slowly, his spirit inspired the others, and where once they had lived quietly, now they began to follow his lead. There is one tale often told about his earliest days, one that reveals why the other monkeys came to look to him as their leader. Deep within the mountain was a waterfall, tall and thunderous, crashing down into a hidden pool. The monkeys admired it but dared not approach. The spray alone was enough to chill them, and the force of the water seemed impenetrable. But the stone-born monkey was not content with admiration from afar. He declared boldly that he would leap through the sheet of falling water and discover what secrets lay beyond. And so, without hesitation, he did. His body disappeared into the torrent, swallowed by the roar, and for a moment the others feared they would never see him again. But then, from the other side, they heard his laughter echoing back, triumphant. He had found a cavern hidden behind the waterfall, a shelter safe and dry, with stone walls carved by time itself. It became a home for the monkey clan, a palace of their own, discovered through his courage. From that day on, the others bowed to him as their king, for he had led them to safety and wonder. What is striking here is not only the tale itself, but what it tells us about the way ancient people imagined leadership. In this story, a leader is not the strongest in brute force, but the one who dares to leap where others hesitate. In a time when travel across mountains was dangerous, when storms and rivers could mean life or death, courage and curiosity were as valuable as strength. Sun Wukong, though still young and playful, embodied those qualities in abundance. Now, if we step back for a moment, let's consider the world in which this story was first told. The people of Tang Dynasty China were deeply connected to both nature and the unseen. Folklore was not a separate realm but part of daily life, shaping how people viewed the world around them. To imagine a monkey born from stone was not absurd. It was a poetic truth, a way of saying that life could spring from the union of earth and sky, that destiny might appear in the unlikeliest of forms. Mountains especially were sacred places, thought to be the dwelling spots of immortals and spirits. To live near such places was to live at the edge of mystery. For the Tang people, myths like this were not simply entertainment. They were explanations, comforts, and sometimes warnings. A strange birth, such as that of Sun Wukong, carried meaning. It suggested that the universe was alive, brimming with intention, and that even a playful monkey might hold the seeds of greatness. It also reflected something more subtle, the hope that greatness might arise from anywhere, even the humblest of beginnings. After all, if a creature of stone could become a king among monkeys, perhaps an ordinary farmer's child could rise to greatness too. And so, on the mountain of flowers and fruit, Sun Wukong began his life. He was still only a playful creature, eager to laugh, eager to discover. But there was already something larger at work in his story. The heavens had noticed him, the earth had given birth to him, and the other monkeys had crowned him their leader. He was a child of destiny, though he did not yet understand what that meant. For now, he was simply a being of joy, bounding through forests, splashing through streams, and gazing at the stars with the wide-eyed wonder of a soul newly awakened. What if, tonight, as you listen, you let yourself step into that moment? Imagine watching the stone crack open, feeling the air shift as something miraculous enters the world. Imagine following him through the waterfall, heart pounding, to find the cavern hidden beyond. These stories are not just about him. They are about us, about the way we long for courage, for adventure, for a touch of the miraculous in our own ordinary lives. If you'd like more journeys like this, you're welcome to follow along and share your favorite myths. The cavern behind the waterfall had become a home, and for a time it was enough. Sun Wukong ruled happily among his monkey companions, feasting on fruits, playing in the streams, and inventing games that filled their days with laughter. Yet in quiet moments, when the moon rose high and silver light poured over the peaks, he felt a restlessness stir. Life was joyous, yes, but it was also fleeting. The monkeys who had followed him so eagerly began to grow old. Their fur thinned, their bodies slowed, and eventually, they faded away into silence. Sun Wukong, though still strong, could not escape the truth. Even kings of monkeys were bound by time. He began to ask questions that unsettled his companions. Why must we die? Why must the breath of life leave us when we have only just begun to enjoy it? The others shrugged or avoided his gaze. For them, death was simply the way of things. But Sun Wukong's heart burned with defiance. If life was a gift, why should it not last forever? If heaven and earth could endure for countless ages, why not him? One morning, before the sun had risen, he made his decision. He would leave the mountain of flowers and fruit. He would go out into the wider world, beyond the forests and rivers he knew, and he would find the secret of immortality. His companions begged him to stay, but he only smiled and promised that he would return, not just as their king, but as one who had conquered death itself. And so he began his wandering. Picture him walking along narrow paths that wound through villages and valleys, his fur still shining, his eyes bright with determination. The people he encountered were surprised, for he was no ordinary beast. He wore clothes scavenged from travelers, imitating humans with an air of mischief. Sometimes he mimicked the voices of those he heard, repeating phrases in a comically exaggerated fashion. Other times, he startled villagers by dancing in the market or snatching fruit from a stall, only to bow politely afterward as though his theft were a form of play. He was both endearing and irritating, a creature of contradictions. In this age, the Tang dynasty was alive with wandering sages and seekers. Taoist hermits lived in mountains, studying the stars, brewing elixirs, and practicing breath techniques they believed could lengthen life. Some carried bamboo staffs and wore robes patched from scraps of cloth. Others claimed to have glimpsed immortals in their meditations, to have tasted rare herbs that could grant centuries of vitality. Ordinary villagers both respected and feared them, for who could say if such men were charlatans or saints? Into this world strode Sun Wukong, eager to learn, determined to find a master who could teach him what no monkey had ever known. After many trials, he came upon a venerable Taoist master known for his wisdom. The sage, amused by this brash stone-born monkey, agreed to take him on as a disciple, though not without stern warnings. The path to immortality, he explained, was not easy. It required discipline, patience, and humility. Sun Wukong bowed low, promising obedience, though in his heart he already felt a flicker of mischief. Training began at once. The master taught him how to steady his breath until his chest rose and fell like the tides. He instructed him in postures that aligned the body with the currents of the universe. He showed him how to listen to silence, how to draw strength from stillness. At first, Sun Wukong was restless. Sitting still seemed unbearable. He longed to leap, to play, to chatter. Yet slowly, he discovered that patience brought its own rewards. In stillness, he felt power coil inside him like a spring. In silence, he began to hear the whispers of the world. When lessons turned to martial arts, Sun Wukong excelled. His body was already nimble, his leaps astonishing, his reflexes lightning fast. But under the master's guidance, his movements became purposeful rather than chaotic. He learned to channel his energy, to strike with precision, to flow like water around obstacles. Martial arts, the master said, were not only for fighting but for understanding balance, harmony, and self-control. Sun Wukong listened, though he could not help but grin when he sent his fellow students tumbling with a well-placed kick. Then came magic. Here, Sun Wukong's eagerness was unmatched. He delighted in transformation, learning to shift his form into birds and beasts, into small creatures and great. With a shake of his fur, he could multiply himself into dozens of copies, each capering and laughing in unison. He studied cloud somersaulting, a technique that allowed him to travel vast distances in a single bound. He memorized incantations, practiced hand signs, and experimented endlessly. Where others struggled, he flourished, for his curiosity knew no limits. Yet his mischief often betrayed him. When told to keep his powers discreet, he instead entertained himself by startling villagers with sudden transformations. He once disguised himself as an old man, hobbling into a village square, only to leap into the air and reveal his true form, cackling as the crowd fled in terror. The master scolded him harshly, reminding him that true wisdom required restraint. But Sun Wukong, though chastened in the moment, could not resist the thrill of showing off. At last, his training in immortality reached its peak. He was taught methods of breath and energy so refined that they slowed the very passage of time within his body. His hair grew glossy, his form strong. No illness touched him, no weakness slowed him. He had learned the secret he sought, and though his master warned him not to boast, the pride in his eyes could not be hidden. For the people of the Tang dynasty, these tales of Taoist arts resonated deeply. Alchemy, the blending of herbs and minerals into elixirs, was a practice both revered and feared. Some believed it could grant longevity. Others knew it could be deadly, for too much mercury or lead might bring poison rather than salvation. Breath cultivation and meditation were everyday practices, not only for monks but for ordinary villagers seeking health. In Sun Wukong's story, we see their hopes and anxieties mirrored. The dream of mastering nature, of overcoming death, tempered by the warning that pride could undo even the wisest. And so Sun Wukong emerged from his training stronger, brighter, and prouder than ever before. He had gained immortality, mastered transformations, and learned martial skills beyond compare. Yet he had also tasted the sweetness of power, and it lingered on his tongue like honey. He no longer feared death, but perhaps he feared too little. For when one is invincible, what boundaries remain? When one learns too much, does wisdom always follow? What do you think? Should knowledge have limits? If you have thoughts, I would love to hear them. When Sun Wukong returned to the mountain of flowers and fruit, he was no longer just the daring leader who had once leapt through waterfalls. He came back as something far more extraordinary, immortal, strong beyond measure, and armed with knowledge that few mortals or spirits could ever hope to match. His companions rejoiced at his return, bowing before him, eager once more to follow his lead. The stone-born monkey, who had once played like a child among them, now stood tall with the confidence of a king. And so, he declared himself not merely leader, but the Monkey King, ruler of the mountain of flowers and fruit, protector of his clan, and master of his own destiny. At first, his kingdom was simple, a joyous domain of laughter and freedom. His monkeys adored him, and he reveled in their devotion. But soon, whispers of his growing power reached higher realms. The Jade Emperor, ruler of heaven, heard reports of this defiant creature. A monkey born from stone, claiming kingship, boasting of immortality, and daring to live without bowing to the heavenly order. Such boldness could not go unnoticed. And yet, the emperor was reluctant to make war upon him. Order in heaven was delicate. To crush the monkey outright would risk unrest. Perhaps, thought the emperor, it would be wiser to placate him, to fold him into heaven's hierarchy with a title and a place. So an invitation was sent, shimmering on celestial parchment, and Sun Wukong accepted with great curiosity. Imagine him ascending to heaven, his cloud somersault carrying him higher and higher until he stood at the gates of the celestial city. The palaces gleamed like crystal and jade, their towers crowned with golden roofs that caught the light of 10,000 suns. Courtyards stretched wide as valleys, filled with fragrant blossoms that never faded. Everywhere were the immortals of heaven. Robed officials, generals clad in shining armor, maidens carrying lotus lanterns that glowed like stars. For a moment, Sun Wukong was dazzled. Who would not be, stepping into such splendor? But as he walked through those endless halls, he noticed something. The immortals glanced at him sidelong, whispering behind their sleeves. A monkey, they thought, crude and wild, dressed in silks that did not suit him. He was offered a title, Protector of the Horses. It sounded noble enough, but in truth it was little more than stable-keeper, caretaker of celestial steeds. The Jade Emperor had hoped to flatter him with position while keeping him far from power. Sun Wukong accepted, smiling and bowing, but in his heart he seethed. Protector of the Horses. Was this the place given to one who had mastered immortality, who had trained with sages, who had declared himself king? He did his duties with diligence, yes, but also with mischief. He fed the heavenly horses not with ordinary fodder, but with strange herbs and fruits that made them frisky and unruly. He polished their coats until they gleamed brighter than their keepers. And when officials came to inspect, he strutted proudly, mocking their solemn faces behind their backs. The horses adored him. The immortals were less amused. Eventually, his patience wore thin. He demanded recognition worthy of his greatness, but heaven answered with silence. One day, he threw down his duties in disgust and stormed back to the mountain of flowers and fruit, declaring himself once again the true king, owing nothing to heaven. His monkeys cheered, and for a while he relished the freedom of ruling his own domain. But word soon reached him that in the celestial records, he was still listed as a mere stable-keeper. To Sun Wukong, this was the final insult. His pride ignited like fire. He returned to heaven, this time not as a guest but as a rebel. He slipped through its palaces, mocking guards, sneaking past officials, and leaving chaos in his wake. Imagine him striding into a banquet hall, where tables overflowed with celestial wines and delicacies. He plucked fruits from golden platters, gulped down sweet nectar, and laughed as dignitaries gasped at his audacity. Once, at the grand peach banquet, held in honor of the Queen Mother of the West, he arrived uninvited. Great baskets of peaches had been gathered. Fruits so rare they ripened only once every 3,000 years, granting extraordinary longevity to those who ate them. The air shimmered with their fragrance, delicate yet powerful, like spring itself distilled into flesh. Sun Wukong, unable to resist, seized them greedily. He bit into the first, juice dripping down his chin, savoring the burst of flavor that seemed to fill his veins with fire and light. One peach, then another, until whole trays had vanished under his eager hands. Servants ran to fetch the Jade Emperor, but by the time they arrived, the Monkey King had disappeared, leaving only peach pits scattered like stones across the floor. This bold theft was not his only act of defiance. He raided the celestial kitchens, drinking deep of heavenly wine, feasting until his belly was full and his laughter echoed down the marble corridors. He broke into the alchemical chambers of Laozi himself, where golden elixirs simmered in bronze cauldrons. He dipped his fingers into the glowing brew, tasting immortality upon immortality, as though one life were not enough for him. Each sip strengthened him, each theft making him bolder. But perhaps the most striking detail is the way he carried himself through it all. He did not creep like a thief in the shadows. He paraded like a trickster king. When guards tried to seize him, he laughed and transformed, into a bird, into a fish, into 1,000 tiny copies of himself scattering like sparks in the wind. He turned official seals into playthings, scrolls into paper fans, robes into flags waving mockingly behind him. Heaven, with all its splendor and order, had never known such chaos. If we pause here, it is worth reflecting on what these stories reveal. To the people of Tang China, heaven mirrored their earthly empire. The Jade Emperor was like their own son of heaven, the Tang Emperor, seated in splendor at the center of a vast bureaucracy. Officials in embroidered robes carried out duties in rigid hierarchy, just as ministers and magistrates did on earth. Sun Wukong's rebellion, then, was more than a monkey's mischief. It was a parody of the whole order. He was the outsider who refused to bow, the wild spirit who mocked ceremony and rank. In a society where titles and hierarchy defined one's life, he embodied a fantasy of defiance. And yet, even fantasy carries unease. For while it was thrilling to imagine a monkey upsetting heaven's order, there was danger too. The Tang dynasty valued harmony, balance, respect for rank. A creature who refused to recognize limits could not be contained forever. His joy in mocking heaven foreshadowed a coming reckoning, one that would shake even the celestial throne. For now, though, Sun Wukong basked in his triumph. He had tasted peaches of immortality, drunk heavenly wine, and swallowed golden elixir. He had paraded through heaven's palaces, leaving behind outrage and laughter in equal measure. He was no longer just the monkey king of a mountain. He was the great sage equal to heaven, a title he claimed for himself loud and unashamed. Have you ever felt underestimated, given a role too small for your spirit? That was Sun Wukong's fate. If you've known what it feels like to be overlooked, perhaps you can understand why he laughed in the faces of heaven's officials. If you'd like to share, the rebellion of Sun Wukong could not be ignored forever. His theft of peaches, his feasting on heavenly wine, his mocking of the Jade Emperor's order, it all demanded a response. And so heaven gathered its armies, summoning hosts beyond counting. Warriors clad in golden armor descended with spears and banners, their ranks stretching across the skies like a storm cloud of fire and steel. Drums thundered, horns blared, and for a moment it seemed as though the very heavens themselves trembled with the sound of mustering war. Yet against them stood one figure, a monkey, laughing, fearless, staff in hand. The Rui Jingu Bang, his enchanted weapon, shifted and stretched as he willed it. One moment it was a delicate needle tucked behind his ear. The next it was a towering pillar of iron, sweeping aside whole regiments with a single swing. He somersaulted through the clouds, striking, vanishing, reappearing with mischief in his grin. Arrows shattered harmlessly against his immortal body. Spears splintered as though made of straw. Again and again, The celestial soldiers surged forward, only to be scattered like leaves in a gale. But heaven had endless ranks, and Sun Wukong, though untiring, began to find his rebellion less play than battle. They brought forth mighty generals, each with 1,000 years of skill. They called upon gods of thunder and fire, who hurled down storms meant to scorch and bind. Still, the Monkey King slipped free, mocking their efforts. He transformed into insects to escape nets, into mountains to crush his foes, into flashes of light to evade their grasp. For a time, it seemed he might never be caught. At last, when even the Jade Emperor's authority seemed strained to breaking, the great Buddha was summoned. Calm, serene, and immeasurable, he descended not as a warrior but as a presence. His eyes were vast as the sky. His voice carried with the weight of eternity. Where armies had failed, patience and wisdom would triumph. Sun Wukong, brash and unbowed, boasted that none could hold him. "I can leap beyond the edges of heaven itself," he declared. The Buddha only smiled. "Then show me," he said softly. So the Monkey King somersaulted, soaring for what seemed like endless leagues. He leapt through storms, past galaxies, to the very ends of the cosmos, or so he thought. There he saw 5 towering pillars, rising into the void. He scrawled his name upon one in triumph, and to mock heaven further, he left his mark in another way as well. Then, confident, he leapt back, certain of his victory. But when he landed, he saw the Buddha waiting, still serene. The 5 pillars were not at the edge of creation. They were the fingers of the Buddha's hand. Realization struck too late. The hand closed, and with it the Monkey King's freedom ended. The Buddha pressed him down, and with the weight of divine power, a mountain was conjured, vast and immovable. 5 elements fused together: metal, wood, water, fire, and earth, an eternal seal. The mountain descended upon Sun Wukong, pinning him beneath its crushing weight. Imagine the silence after battle, broken only by his ragged breath. The stone pressed down so heavily that even his immortal body strained. He could not lift it, not with all his strength, not with all his cunning. His golden eyes, once fierce with defiance, flickered with disbelief. To be so strong, and yet powerless. To be immortal and yet confined. The mountain was more than stone. It was consequence itself, unyielding, cold, eternal. Time passed. Seasons wheeled above him, unseen but felt. He could hear the wind rushing across the mountain slopes, smell the faint fragrance of blossoms in spring, feel the cool of snow in winter as it seeped into cracks of stone. Birds nested above him, rivers carved valleys at the mountain's base. Empires rose and fell, dynasties shifted, yet he remained. At first he raged. He howled and cursed, shaking the stone with fury. He vowed vengeance, plotted escape, strained until the ground itself quaked. But no freedom came. His anger wore thin, giving way to restlessness, then to sorrow. How many years can fury last, when met only with silence? And so he waited. He thought of his monkeys, of the mountain where he once ruled. He thought of the peaches, their sweetness still lingering faintly on his tongue. He thought of the Buddha's calm eyes, the serene weight of that single hand. Most of all, he thought of himself. Not the king, not the rebel, not the great sage equal to heaven, but the being trapped beneath stone, alone with his thoughts. The Chinese understood punishment not only as retribution but as a chance for balance, for reflection. To suffer was also to be tempered, as iron in the forge. Fate, they believed, was a cycle. Even the wildest spirit could one day learn stillness. Beneath the mountain, Sun Wukong's tale became less about rebellion and more about endurance. His immortality meant his sentence would be long, but it also meant he had time to learn what no battle could teach him. What would it feel like to wait beneath stone for 500 years? To hear the turning of seasons and the footsteps of history, while you remained still? Can even the wildest spirit learn patience? Perhaps that is why his story endures. We, too, struggle with waiting, with being held in place when our hearts yearn to leap forward. Sun Wukong's mountain is heavy, yes, but it is also a mirror. For patience, though hard, may yet be the path to freedom. If you have felt trapped in waiting by circumstance, by time, by your own restlessness, share your thoughts below. How do you find patience, even when stone presses heavy upon you? The story of Sun Wukong's long imprisonment might have ended there, beneath the mountain, his pride and fury buried under centuries of stone. But fate is rarely still. One day, when the time was right, a new figure stepped into the tale. A quiet man whose life's mission would carry him across deserts, mountains, and kingdoms. His name was Xuanzang, though in story he is often called Tripitaka. Xuanzang was a monk of the Tang dynasty, living in a world where China was vast, powerful, and deeply shaped by both Confucian order and Buddhist devotion. In the bustling cities of Chang'an and Luoyang, the great monasteries were filled with scholars and pilgrims, their halls echoing with chants in Sanskrit, Pali, and Chinese. Buddhism had already traveled far from India, reshaped and reinterpreted along the Silk Roads, but Xuanzang was troubled. Too many scriptures were missing, mistranslated, or incomplete. He longed to see the truth with his own eyes, to bring back the authentic words of the Buddha. So he prepared himself for a journey few dared to take. Westward, across deserts that swallowed men whole, through mountains where even birds struggled to fly, into lands ruled by foreign kings and unknown customs. He did not go for riches or conquest or glory. He went for faith, for knowledge, and for the hope that wisdom could guide his people. The emperor, recognizing the nobility of his mission, blessed him. And yet, the road was too long, too perilous, for any man to walk alone. Heaven, in its compassion, provided him with a companion. Thus the Buddha turned his gaze once more to the monkey beneath the mountain. Sun Wukong had raged, had mourned, had waited. When Xuanzang approached, guided by divine will, the bindings loosened. Yet there was a condition. Sun Wukong must serve the monk, must keep him safe, must bend his unruly will to the vow of pilgrimage. A magical band was placed upon his head, delicate yet unbreakable. At Xuanzang's quiet chant, it would tighten, reminding him that pride could only be tempered by obedience. Imagine it. A monk clothed in simple robes, his eyes gentle, voice soft as a stream, standing before a warrior born of stone, fierce as thunder, wild as fire. One moved with prayer beads, the other with a staff. One sought scriptures, the other sought freedom. And yet they were bound together, two halves of a single journey. At first, the contrast was sharp. Sun Wukong, eager to prove his strength, dispatched demons with a ferocity that unsettled the compassionate monk. Xuanzang, by nature gentle, begged for mercy, reminding his companion that even spirits had a chance at redemption. Sun Wukong bristled at restraint. Why spare those who preyed on travelers, who threatened their lives? But with each step, each test, he began to learn what he had never found in heaven's palaces or beneath the mountain's weight: the meaning of balance. Their road wound westward, through villages where peasants bowed low to offer rice, through forests where bandits lurked in shadow, across rivers where ferrymen spoke of strange omens. At night, Xuanzang whispered sutras under the stars, his voice a calm rhythm that settled even the restless monkey's heart. In turn, Sun Wukong stood guard, golden eyes glowing, staff resting lightly in his hand, listening for the crack of twigs or the breath of a hidden foe. In these moments, the legends intertwine with history. The real Xuanzang did indeed journey west, in the early 7th century, leaving Chang'an in secret and traveling for 17 years. He crossed the deserts of Central Asia, studied at Nalanda University in India, and returned with hundreds of texts, forever transforming Buddhism in China. His memory lives not only in tales of flying monkeys and dragon steeds, but also in stone carvings, temple inscriptions, and the quiet reverence of those who still recite his translations today. The storytellers of later generations took his life and wove it with threads of wonder. They gave him a guardian born from stone, fierce as rebellion yet loyal as kin. They gave him demons to test his patience, companions to mirror his virtues, adventures to reflect the very challenges of walking a spiritual path. Was it all myth? Was it history? Perhaps both, perhaps neither. But what remains is the truth of longing. A man seeking wisdom, and a wild spirit learning restraint. Imagine setting out on a road with no end in sight, your only companions. Trust, and a wild spirit bound by promise. Would you walk that path? Would you trust that the journey, however hard, would shape you as much as the destination? As the monk and the monkey set forth, the road to the west stretched long before them. Mountains waited, rivers coiled, demons plotted. Yet so too did the scriptures, gleaming like hidden stars. One step after another, they began. A journey not of conquest, but of faith, discipline, and transformation. If you were walking beside them, what role would you play? Would you guard the monk, whisper the sutras, or simply carry the weight of the road? Share your thoughts if you'd like. For stories such as these live longest when we walk them together. The road to the west was never quiet for long. Though Xuanzang carried himself with humility, his mission was known to heaven and whispered among the spirits. For a monk walking the earth with a wild monkey by his side, the journey became as much about trials of the heart as dangers of the road. Each encounter seemed designed not simply to threaten, but to teach. Take, for example, the white-boned demon. She was no roaring beast, no scaled dragon. Rather, she was cunning, clothed in guises meant to test compassion itself. Again and again she appeared before the travelers, disguised as an innocent girl, then as a grieving mother, then as an old woman leaning on a staff. Each time, Sun Wukong's sharp eyes pierced through her illusion. Each time, his staff came down in a strike meant to protect his master. Yet Xuanzang, unable to see past the masks, believed his companion too hasty, too cruel. His heart ached at what seemed needless violence. The white-boned demon's trick was not merely deception. It was the doubt it sowed between monk and guardian. What is trust, after all, if not the willingness to believe in one another's sight, even when our own eyes fail us? Only after the truth was revealed did Xuanzang grasp that his protector's harshness was born of loyalty. And Sun Wukong, for his part, learned how heavy a burden it was to be mistrusted, even when his heart was true. Along the way, others joined their fellowship. There was Zhu Beiji, often called Pigsy, once a marshal of heaven's armies before his greed and gluttony brought him low. Reincarnated with the features of a pig, he carried both great strength and endless appetite. At first glance, he seemed little more than comic relief, his belly rumbling, his eyes ever seeking food and comfort. Yet beneath his foolishness lay resilience, the kind that carries heavy loads and endures the endless miles. Where Sun Wukong burned like fire, Pigsy plodded like earth, steady in his own way. Then came Sha Wujing, or Sandy the river spirit. Once a celestial general, he too had fallen, condemned to dwell in a river where he devoured the unwary. His punishment left him scarred, beads of skulls strung about his neck, a reminder of what he had been. Yet when Xuanzang came, he too was redeemed, given a place in the company. Sandy was quiet, patient, unshaken by hardship. Where the others quarreled and boasted, he carried burdens in silence, a reminder that strength is not always loud. Together they walked, for guardians and one monk, through landscapes as vast and varied as dreams. Forests where the wind murmured through endless pines, rivers that gleamed silver under the moon, deserts where the sand stung their faces and the horizon quivered with heat. At night, stars spilled across the sky like uncountable lanterns, reminding them that the road stretched not only across land, but across time. These landscapes, though wrapped in legend, were not unlike those faced by real pilgrims in the Tang dynasty. Travelers leaving Chang'an might cross the Gobi Desert, where water was scarce and storms swallowed caravans whole. Bandits haunted mountain passes, their blades just as deadly as any demon's claws. Superstition filled the wilderness. Every grove, every cave, every shadow might conceal a spirit watching, waiting. It is no wonder, then, that tales of demons grew alongside memories of hardship. For to tell of Sun Wukong battling monsters was to speak also of the real dangers of the road, and the resilience needed to endure them. Communities who saw these pilgrims pass treated them with awe. Imagine living in a small village, your life bound by rice fields and seasonal rains. When one day a monk appears, dusty and thin, eyes alight with purpose. Behind him walks a band of strange companions. One with a monkey's grin, another with a pig's snout, another tall and silent with beads of skulls. How would you see them? Perhaps as holy wanderers, perhaps as omens, perhaps as living proof that the world is far larger than your own valley. And in truth, that was the heart of the tale. The journey was not simply about defeating demons, but about learning from them. The white-boned demon revealed the fragility of trust. Pigsy's presence reminded them of the dangers of indulgence, but also the power of endurance. Sandy showed that even the fallen could serve with dignity. Sun Wukong himself, fierce and proud, learned to temper strength with patience, though not without struggle. And Xuanzang, steady as a flame in the wind, learned that compassion required not only mercy, but also faith in those who walked beside him. Even demons, perhaps, are just lessons in disguise. What do you think? Are our greatest challenges enemies or teachers? If you feel so moved, share your reflections. For every road we walk, whether across deserts or through quiet evenings before sleep, carries its own hidden lessons. And sometimes, it is only in looking back that we see what they were. The journey westward was lined not only with demons lurking in forests or spirits haunting rivers, but also with storms that brewed within the heart. For Sun Wukong, the fiercest of those storms lay in himself. His temper, his pride, his unwillingness to bend. Though he had been freed from the mountain, he was still bound, not only by the iron weight of a vow but by the magical band upon his head. That circlet was no ordinary ornament. It looked delicate, like a thin fillet of gold, but it was a chain stronger than any iron. Xuanzang had been given a spell, a quiet chant, that when recited would cause the band to tighten. At the first intonation of the words, the circlet gripped Wukong's brow like fire, searing him with pain sharper than any spear. It was not cruelty for cruelty's sake. It was a reminder, a lesson. Strength without discipline would lead only to ruin. Again and again Wukong's temper surged. A demon would appear on the road, and he would be swift to crush it, his staff descending in a single blow. Xuanzang, horrified, would beg for mercy, pleading that even wicked spirits might yet turn toward the Dharma. At such moments, frustration boiled in Wukong's chest. Why should he, protector and warrior, hold back? Why should compassion for an enemy outweigh safety for his master? But each time his anger overran him, Xuanzang's voice would rise in chant, and the band would tighten. And in that fire of pain, Wukong would be forced to pause, to breathe, to remember that power must bow to something greater. It was not an easy lesson. Pride is not melted away in a day, nor in 100. Even after centuries under stone, Wukong's heart remained quick to flare. But slowly, like a stone polished by running water, he began to change. He saw how Xuanzang's compassion was not weakness, but strength of another kind. A strength that endured insult without striking back. A strength that forgave, that saw the world not as enemies and allies, but as beings all capable of suffering, all capable of awakening. One can imagine, perhaps, how such lessons reflected the world of Tangera Buddhism. In monasteries across China, monks rose before dawn to chant sutras, their voices weaving together like wind through pines. Meditation halls rang with the sound of wooden fish drums, guiding minds into focus. The teachings of compassion were not abstract but lived daily. To care for the sick, to feed the poor, to refrain from anger even when wronged. For common people, these values seeped into daily life. Compassion became a measure of respect, patience a mark of dignity. And so, Wukong's struggle was not unlike that of any person in that age or in ours. To master the self was the true pilgrimage. To quiet the voice that demanded victory, to temper the hand that struck too quickly, to see not only one's own suffering but the suffering of others, that was the greater challenge. Often, at night, when campfires burned low and the road lay still, Wukong would sit apart, staff across his knees, eyes glimmering like coals. He would remember the mountain pressing down on him, the helplessness of centuries. He would touch the band upon his brow, resentful of its sting, yet knowing it kept him free. For had he not been bound, would he not have already fallen back into chaos? In the quiet, he listened as Xuanzang murmured sutras, words flowing like water. Sometimes, the monkey's breath slowed to match the rhythm, as though the chant reached a part of him he could not fight. Balance became his teacher, the balance of strength and gentleness, of fire and calm. He was a warrior, yes, but a warrior guided not only by force, but by compassion, though it was a lesson he had to learn again and again, each time his temper flared. Perhaps the fiercest battles are not with demons outside, but storms within. And when we think of Sun Wukong, we see not only the warrior born of stone, but the soul learning, painfully, that even the strongest must bow to patience, humility, and compassion. Have you met such storms within yourself? Anger that rose too quickly, pride that burned too hot, restlessness that could not be soothed? So you are not alone. The story reminds us that the true journey is not only across mountains and rivers, but inward, into the heart's own wilderness. If you feel called, share your reflections. For each story of inner battle, each small victory of patience over pride, is itself a step along the path. The road had stretched on for years, each mile carrying the pilgrims farther from the familiar valleys of Tangchina and deeper into the unknown. They had crossed deserts that shimmered like seas of glass, forests where the trees whispered with hidden voices, villages where suspicion and reverence mingled in equal measure. Now, as they neared the end of their journey, the trials grew no lighter. If anything, the final stages demanded all the strength, patience, and unity they had gathered along the way. The mountains loomed first, jagged and vast, their peaks veiled in drifting clouds. Snow fell even in summer, and the paths were narrow, no wider than a single traveler's step. One misstep might send them tumbling into chasms below. Yet they pressed forward, Wukong scouting ahead with eyes sharp as falcons, Pigsy carrying burdens despite his endless grumbling, Sandy steady as stone, and Xuanzang moving with the quiet persistence of a flame that never wavered. Their breaths frosted in the air, their robes stiffened with ice, but each step was a vow renewed. Then came the rivers. Some were shallow crossings, cold water lapping at their knees. Others were raging torrents, swollen with rain and snowmelt, their currents eager to drag any living thing beneath. More than once, the pilgrims were forced to improvise, ropes tied from branch to branch, rafts cobbled together from felled trunks. Pigsy's strength steadied the ropes, Sandy's patience guided the raft, and Wukong, darting across the waves with staff in hand, drove away the spirits who lurked in the spray. Xuanzang, calm even as waters roared around him, chanted softly, his voice a tether that kept the group from despair. The enemies they faced in these last stretches seemed fiercer, too. Demons who knew the monk's mission neared its fulfillment. Some appeared as mighty kings, others as shadowed figures in caves, still others as serpents coiled in the depths of rivers. Yet by now, the pilgrims no longer fought as strangers bound by chance. They fought as one. Wukong no longer rushed ahead heedless of his companions. He guarded Xuanzang with discipline, his strikes measured rather than reckless. Pigsy, though tempted always by distraction, bore the weight of duty with more dignity than before. Sandy, once silent, now offered quiet words of encouragement when the road grew long. And Xuanzang himself? He had never been a warrior, yet his presence was their anchor. Where once Wukong's pride might have flared, it was now tempered by the monk's steady gaze. Where Pigsy's belly might have led him astray, Xuanzang's patience called him back. His compassion was not a softness that endangered them but a strength that shaped them all, teaching that even in struggle, mercy has its place. In this closing stage, Sun Wukong's transformation became clear. Gone was the reckless monkey who mocked heaven, who seized peaches and wine for sport. In his place stood a guardian, fierce still, but bound by more than magic. Discipline had become part of him, earned through hardship, through pain, through the quiet endurance of years on the road. His wildness was not extinguished, but it had been honed, as raw or become steel when tempered in fire and water. For the Tang people who told and retold these stories, the West was more than geography. India was a place of wisdom, the homeland of the Buddha's words, the source of a light that had already transformed Chinese life. To speak of traveling westward was to speak of renewal, of reaching toward a horizon where truth might be found. The journey was not simply about fetching scriptures, but about the transformation that came in seeking them. At last, the pilgrims crossed the final mountains. The land opened, vast and new, and in the distance rose the sacred places they had sought for so long. Xuanzang's eyes filled with quiet wonder. Wukong, though he grinned, carried his staff with reverence. Pigsy laughed with relief. Sandy bowed his head in calm respect. Each bore scars of the road, yet those scars had become their proof of growth, their reminders of what they had endured together. And so, after thousands of miles, they reached the sacred land. But perhaps the greater story lies not in what they found, but in what they became. Do you believe journeys change us more than destinations? Think of your own paths, the ones you have walked, the ones still ahead. Share your reflections if you wish, for stories such as this one live on not only in temples or books, but in the quiet exchange of hearts remembering the roads they have traveled. At last, after countless steps over mountains and rivers, through forests and deserts, the pilgrims reached the sacred land of India. Here, in monasteries filled with incense and quiet chanting, Xuanzang received the scriptures that had called him westward. The scrolls were heavy not only with words but with meaning, teachings meant to ease suffering, to bring clarity, to guide hearts across centuries. The long return journey lay before them, but now their burdens felt lighter. What they carried was not just paper and ink, but wisdom to be shared with an entire empire. For Sun Wukong, the road had been more than a path across the earth. It had been the shaping of his spirit. The monkey who once declared himself equal to heaven, who laughed at rules and mocked restraint, now bowed his head with respect. At the journey's end, he was granted Buddhahood, a title not of rebellion, but of peace. His fiery nature had not been destroyed, but it had been transformed, directed toward protection, compassion, and clarity. At last, his restless heart was still. The tale of the Monkey King does not end only with victory or reward, but with change. From stone-born trickster to enlightened guardian, his arc is one of growth that mirrors our own struggles, wild energy seeking purpose, pride tempered by patience, strength balanced by humility. Through him, listeners across dynasties saw both warning and hope, the danger of unchecked ambition, and the redemption possible through discipline and compassion. And as with all enduring myths, the story lived on. Told in temples, whispered along trade routes, painted in scrolls, and eventually written into the great novel Journey to the West, it became part of cultural memory. Each retelling shaped it anew, yet its heart remained the same. Sun Wukong's laughter, Xuanzang's calm, Pigsy's grumbling loyalty, Sandy's quiet strength. All of these companions still walk with us, their lessons as vivid today as when Tang travelers braved the unknown. Even now, across oceans and languages, the story carries meaning. It speaks of journeys outward and inward, of the discipline it takes to tame our inner storms, of the hope that growth is possible no matter how wild the spirit begins. That is why we return to it, why it soothes us, why it stays. Stories live because we share them. If this journey brought you calm, I'd be honored if you joined me for more nights of listening. Subscribe, leave a kind thought, or share your reflections, so that together, we keep these tales alive. In the quiet that follows the end of a long tale, we are left with gentle echoes. The story of Sun Wukong and the journey west is more than a chain of adventures. It is a reflection of longing and fear, of faith and discipline, of what it means to walk a path that shapes you as much as it leads you forward. In ancient China, such stories were not merely diversions. They were companions. Families would gather in dim courtyards, children leaning close, elders nodding softly, as storytellers gave voice to myths that carried both laughter and wisdom. For people who lived with uncertainty, farmers watching the sky for rain, merchants setting out on dangerous roads, mothers soothing their children to sleep, these tales were a comfort. They reassured listeners that chaos could be tamed, that even a restless monkey could find peace, that no road was walked in vain. Folklore, legend, and history intertwined, reminding ordinary lives that they were part of something greater, a fabric woven from both myth and memory. When we listen today, we join that same circle of listeners. We breathe the same quiet air that countless generations once shared as stories filled the night. The adventures may be grand, with demons and gods and distant kingdoms, yet at their heart they touch something familiar, the wish to be understood, to grow, to find meaning in the wandering. And isn't that why we return to such tales? They remind us that journeys are not only about reaching a faraway land, but about shaping the soul along the way. As this story settles within you, may it soothe you like a lullaby. May it remind you that even the wildest heart can learn stillness, that every restless path can end in peace. And may you carry that comfort with you, into your dreams and into your waking days. As you drift into rest, may Sun Wukong's journey remind you that even the restless heart can find peace. If you enjoyed this story, let's meet again for the next.